Captain Riley Tank Morrison had exactly three things going for her at the prestigious Nexus Academy: a spotless service record, an unhealthy addiction to energy drinks, and the dubious honor of being the youngest cadet ever accepted into the Galactic Council's elite peacekeeping force. At 23, she was practically a toddler by galactic standards, which made walking into advanced tactical studies feel like showing up to a doctoral defense with finger paints. The classroom itself screamed "We're better than you" in 17 different languages. Holographic displays floated like accusations above each desk, while the walls pulsed with ambient intelligence that probably cost more than Earth's entire military budget. Tank slid into the only remaining seat, trying to ignore the fact that her chair had to auto-adjust down 6 inches to accommodate her adorably compact human frame. Well, Commander Vex drawled, his reptilian features twisting into what Tank generously assumed was a smile. The Zephyrian scales shifted from green to a condescending shade of gold. Did someone's offspring wander into the wrong classroom? His tactical genius was matched only by his talent for making everyone feel like pond scum. Lieutenant Kora clicked disapprovingly, her mandibles producing a sound like a disappointed typewriter. The insectoid's compound eyes reflected Tank in 1,000 tiny fragments, each one judging her found wanting. The child appears to be in the correct location. Regrettably, she buzzed with mechanical precision. Oh, come on, she's not that bad. Sergeant Blitz flickered between purple and orange, his plasma being form crackling with what Tank hoped was enthusiasm rather than barely contained violence. I bet she's got some great stories about mud wrestling or whatever humans do for fun. Before Tank could explain that mud wrestling was more of a weekend hobby, the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Professor Thane materialized at the front of the class, his crystalline form refracting the light into patterns that somehow conveyed both ancient wisdom and infinite boredom. When a being made of living mineral managed to look tired, you knew your day was about to get interesting. Today we study the warfare tactics of primitive species, Thane announced, his voice echoing like wind chimes in a tornado. Each student will analyze a pre-spaceflight civilization and present their findings. He gestured, and assignment pods materialized above each desk. Vex opened his first. The Calaxian death cults. Excellent. Mayvine. Kora's revealed itself next. Andromedian swarm protocols. Acceptable. Blitz practically vibrated with excitement. Neutron star siege tactics. This is going to be so cool. Tank's pod opened last because of course it did. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a small blue marble of a planet. Early 21st century Earth conflicts, she read aloud. The silence that followed was so complete Tank could hear Blitz's plasma cells recharging. Then Vex started laughing. Not chuckling, not snickering, but full-blown, scales shifting through the entire visible spectrum laughing. Earth conflicts? What's next? Studying how bacteria wage war on petri dishes. Kora's mandibles clattered in what Tank now recognized as amusement. Perhaps she can enlighten us about the tactical superiority of throwing rocks. Hey now, Blitz said, trying to be diplomatic while still glowing with barely suppressed mirth. I'm sure humans have some interesting stick techniques. Professor Thane raised one crystalline appendage for silence. Each presentation will be evaluated on tactical innovation, strategic depth, and practical application. Captain Morrison, I trust you will find sufficient material to work with, however, limited it may be. Tank stared at her assignment, then at her classmates, then at the professor whose expression somehow managed to convey pity despite being made entirely of rock. She'd been in the academy for exactly 47 hours, and already she was the class joke. Primitive species warfare tactics, she muttered, closing the display. Yeah, this should be fun. 3 days later, Tank sat in the back row watching her classmates deliver presentations that made her feel like she'd brought a slingshot to a laser fight. This was going to be a massacre, and she was pretty sure she knew who was playing the role of the massacree. Vex went first, naturally, because apparently even in an advanced galactic civilization, reptilian supremacists still love being teachers' pets. His presentation on Zephyrian battle meditation involved a lot of impressive holographic displays showing armies achieving perfect tactical harmony through shared consciousness. As you can observe, Vex said, his scales shifting to an authoritative bronze. The Calaxian death cults achieved a 97% victory rate through synchronized mental warfare. Their enemies were defeated before the battle even began, overwhelmed by the sheer perfection of unified thought. Professor Thane nodded approvingly, his crystalline form chiming softly. Elegant. Efficient. Civilized. Kora's presentation on hive-mind tactical networks was equally impressive, featuring coordinated swarm attacks where millions of individual units moved with perfect precision. Each drone's sacrifice served the greater tactical objective. She buzzed with satisfaction. Losses were calculated, acceptable, and ultimately irrelevant to victory. Magnificent strategic unity, Thane commented. Then came Blitz, whose plasma form practically danced as he showed off neutron star siege tactics. Check this out. They'd position themselves around stellar collapse events and use the gravitational waves as weapons. The entire battlefield became a cosmic-scale artillery platform. Innovative use of natural phenomena, Thane said. Impressive thinking on a galactic scale. All eyes turned to Tank. She stood up slowly, her human standard datapad looking pathetically primitive next to the advanced holo-projectors her classmates had used. The first slide of her presentation appeared. A grainy black and white photograph of two biplanes apparently trying to kill each other with what looked like modified farm equipment. So Tank began, humans figured out nuclear weapons before we figured out how to not kill each other with them. The silence was deafening. She clicked to the next slide. A mushroom cloud. This is what we call the Big Boom. We invented it, used it twice, then spent the next 80 years terrified we might accidentally end all life on Earth with it. But we kept making bigger ones. Because apparently humans think the solution to having a weapon too dangerous to use is to make it more dangerous. Vex's scales had shifted to a confused muddy brown. That seems counterproductive. Oh, it gets better, Tank said, advancing to a slide showing kamikaze pilots. Meet the kamikaze. The tactical concept is simple. Turn your pilot into a missile. The logic is questionable, but the commitment is undeniable. Kora's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. They destroyed their own units intentionally? For tactical advantage, yes. See, most species try to preserve their warriors. Humans occasionally decided the warrior was the weapon. Tank clicked again. Here's trench warfare, where two armies spent 4 years staring at each other across a muddy hellscape, occasionally climbing out to charge machine guns with bayonets. Millions died for advances measured in yards. Blitz's plasma form had shifted to a sickly yellow-green. That's horrifying. That's Tuesday, Tank replied cheerfully. Oh, and this is my personal favorite. Acceptable losses. Humans developed mathematical equations to determine how many of our own people we were willing to let die to accomplish an objective. We turned casualty rates into a science. Professor Thane's crystalline structure was actually vibrating now, producing a sound like wind chimes having a nervous breakdown. Captain Morrison, what you're describing isn't warfare. It's chaotic, suicidal, academically worthless madness. Tank looked at her presentation, then at her horrified classmates, then back at the professor. Yeah, that's kind of the point, isn't it? I'm stopping this presentation, Thane announced, his form shifting to an agitated red. These tactics have no merit whatsoever. They're primitive, illogical, and completely without strategic value. Are they, though? Tank asked innocently. I'm assigning you extra credit, Captain Morrison. You will participate in a tactical simulation against your classmates. If these human tactics have any value whatsoever, prove it. Tank smiled. Challenge accepted, Professor. The combat simulation chamber was the kind of impressive that made Tank's wallet weep just looking at it. Holographic projectors hummed at frequencies that probably violated several physics laws, while the chamber's walls could apparently recreate anything from asteroid fields to urban environments with perfect fidelity. Tank stood in the prep area, checking her gear while trying not to think about how much this single room cost compared to her hometown's annual budget. The scenario is simple, Professor Thane announced to the gathered faculty and students. His crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights like a disco ball having an existential crisis. Captain Morrison will face her 3 classmates in a tactical engagement aboard an abandoned space station. Victory conditions are elimination of all opposing forces. Tank looked at her opponents and tried not to laugh. This was like bringing a butter knife to a nuclear weapons convention. Commander Vex had already activated his natural camouflage, his reptilian form blending seamlessly with the chamber's walls. His tactical genius was legendary, his strategic planning flawless, and his ego big enough to have its own gravitational field. "This should take approximately 7 minutes," he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. Lieutenant Kora stood perfectly still, her compound eyes processing tactical data while maintaining uplinks to 3 backup hive-mind networks. Her coordination was inhuman, her precision mechanical, and her ability to multitask would make a quantum computer weep with envy. Calculating optimal engagement patterns, she buzzed with mechanical confidence. Sergeant Blitz was practically bouncing, his plasma form cycling through excited colors while energy crackled around his limbs. He could manipulate electromagnetic fields, move at near light speeds, and apparently had the attention span of a caffeinated hummingbird. "This is going to be so much fun. I've already run 47,000 tactical simulations." Hank hefted her standard-issue energy rifle and tried to look confident. "Awesome. I've run 0 simulations, have no special abilities, and my main tactical advantage is that I'm too stupid to know when I'm beaten." The simulation chamber flickered to life around them, revealing a massive abandoned space station that looked like someone had crossed a shopping mall with a military installation and then left it to decay for about 50 years. Flickering lights cast weird shadows, broken machinery jutted from walls at odd angles, and the whole place had that special, probably haunted atmosphere that humans found inexplicably comforting. "Begin tactical assessment," Thane ordered. Vex immediately started analyzing sight lines and defensive positions. Kora began calculating optimal patrol routes and ambush points. Blitz zipped around the perimeter, mapping energy signatures and structural weak points. Tank walked over to an air vent, kicked it experimentally, then stuck her head inside to check the airflow. She tested the artificial gravity by jumping up and down. She examined structural weak points by hitting them with her rifle butt. She even found a maintenance panel and started poking random buttons just to see what they did. "What is she doing?" one of the observing professors whispered. "I believe she's investigating," another replied uncertainly. Vex's disembodied voice carried a note of condescension. "The human is confused by basic station architecture. This will be easier than anticipated." Kora's mandibles clicked dismissively. She appears to be examining maintenance systems, irrelevant to tactical considerations. Blitz's plasma form brightened with amusement. "I think she's lost. Should we give her a map?" Tank straightened up from where she'd been examining what appeared to be a waste disposal system. She looked around at the complex, multi-level station with its maze of corridors, service tunnels, maintenance shafts, and structural supports. Then she grinned. "You know what?" she said to no one in particular. "I think I'm going to like it here." The other faculty members exchanged glances. Professor Thane's crystalline structure shifted to a skeptical blue. "Begin simulation in 60 seconds, he announced. Tank cracked her knuckles and started humming an old Earth tune about survival under pressure. She had a feeling she was about to give these aliens a crash course in why humans had a reputation for being utterly, completely, and spectacularly unpredictable. "Let the games begin," she muttered. The simulation began with what Tank would later describe as the most beautiful moment of controlled chaos in galactic history. Her classmates spread out with textbook precision, establishing overlapping fields of fire and communication protocols that would have made military academies across the galaxy weep with pride. Tank crawled into a ventilation shaft. "Target has entered the maintenance system," Kora reported, her voice buzzing with mechanical efficiency, attempting to track movement through structural sensors. Vex's camouflaged form shifted position smoothly. Predictable. The human seeks to avoid direct confrontation. Standard guerrilla protocols will suffice. Blitz zipped between levels, his plasma form leaving brief trails of light. "I've got energy signatures all over the place." "Wait, are those decoys?" From somewhere in the walls came a rhythmic banging sound, like someone hammering metal pipes. Then it stopped. Then it started again from a completely different location. Then silence. Then the unmistakable sound of someone singing what sounded like an ancient human war chant, except the lyrics seemed to involve something about bottles of beer. "What is she doing?" Vex hissed, his perfect tactical positioning suddenly feeling less perfect. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red shadows. Through the station's communication system came Tank's voice, distorted by the speakers. "Sorry about that. Turns out maintenance panels are super easy to rewire when you don't care about following safety protocols." Kora's compound eyes adapted instantly to the low light. Irrelevant. Tactical sensors remained functional. She moved toward the central hub, her movements precise despite the darkness. That's when the maintenance drones activated. They weren't combat units, just simple repair bots designed to fix hull breaches and clean corridors. But someone had apparently reprogrammed them to play what Tank cheerfully called the most annoying sound in the universe. At maximum volume, while flashing their work lights in seizure-inducing patterns. "This is not standard tactical doctrine." Vex snarled, his camouflage flickering as he tried to process the sensory chaos. Blitz's plasma form strobed in confusion. "The drones aren't weapons. They're not even threats. They're just annoying." "Welcome to human warfare." Tank's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Rule 1, if it exists, it can be weaponized. Rule 2, annoying your enemy to death is a valid tactical choice." Vex finally spotted movement and fired at what he thought was Tank. His energy blast struck what turned out to be a carefully positioned mannequin made from spare maintenance coveralls stuffed with insulation foam. The fake body exploded in a shower of synthetic stuffing that immediately set off the station's fire suppression system. Foam began spraying from every available nozzle. "Seriously?" Blitz shrieked, his plasma form sputtering as fire-retardant foam disrupted his energy matrix. Kora, meanwhile, had reached the central hub and was methodically analyzing the tactical situation when the floor beneath her gave way. She plummeted through what had once been a solid deck plate but was now a carefully weakened trap that dumped her into the station's recycling center. How did she know the structural load tolerances? Kora buzzed frantically as she found herself surrounded by confused maintenance robots trying to sort her into appropriate recycling categories. "Because humans apparently treat engineering specifications like suggestions," Vex replied, wiping foam from his optical sensors. That's when Tank dropped from an overhead access hatch directly onto Blitz, though wielding what appeared to be a jury-rigged electromagnetic pulse device cobbled together from the station's power coupling system, 3 coffee makers, and what looked suspiciously like the components from a dozen smoke detectors. "Surprise," she announced cheerfully as the device activated. Blitz's plasma form convulsed, then collapsed into what could only be described as a very confused puddle of ionized gas. That's not even a real weapon," he managed to protest. "Tell that to your nervous system," Tank replied, already moving toward her final target. Vex had had enough. The Zephyrian tactical genius abandoned stealth, activated his combat systems, and began a systematic advance toward Tank's last known position, using every sophisticated maneuver in his considerable arsenal. Tank's response was to collapse an entire section of the station's superstructure, using what appeared to be a makeshift catapult constructed from structural beams, maintenance cables, and the station's industrial-strength toilet plunger. Vex found himself launched through a breach in the station's hull, spinning helplessly in simulated space while his tactical genius calculated exactly how badly he'd been outmaneuvered. In the stunned silence that followed, Tank emerged from a supply closet, casually brushing dust off her uniform. "So," she said, looking around at the devastated station, "anyone else want to discuss the academic value of primitive human tactics?" The observing faculty sat in complete silence, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Professor Thane's crystalline structure had shifted to a color that didn't appear in any known spectrum. The debriefing room felt like a courtroom where Tank was simultaneously the defendant, the prosecutor, and the smoking gun. Professor Thane sat at the head of the conference table, his crystalline form flickering through colors that suggested he was either deeply thoughtful or having some kind of mineral breakdown. The other faculty members clustered around him like confused academics witnessing the heat death of their worldview. Her classmates sat across from her, looking like they'd just discovered that everything they thought they knew about warfare was actually a children's bedtime story. Vex's scales had settled into a muddy brown that screamed existential crisis. Kora's mandibles clicked in irregular patterns, suggesting her normally perfect mental processes were experiencing something like recursive loops. Blitz's plasma form kept shifting between colors, unable to settle on an emotional state. "Explain," Professor Thane said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose entire academic career had just been catapulted out an airlock. "Explain how primitive tactics defeated 3 of our most advanced tactical specialists." Tank leaned back in her chair, trying not to look too smug. "Well, Professor, it's pretty simple. While you guys were playing chess, I was playing Jenga with the building you were standing on." "That metaphor makes no sense," Vex protested weakly. "Exactly," Tank said, pointing at him like he'd just proven her point. "You're thinking about warfare like it's a gentleman's sport with rules and proper procedures. Humans treat warfare like survival horror. The goal isn't to look good while you win. It's just to win." She stood up and started pacing, partly because it helped her think and partly because she enjoyed watching Kora's compound eyes track her movement. "Take asymmetric warfare. You've got this beautiful, sophisticated military doctrine based on matching strength with strength, intelligence with intelligence. Humans figured out that if someone brings a sword to a gunfight, you don't bring a better sword. You bring a gun. If they bring a gun, you bring a tank. If they bring a tank, you dig a really good hole and wait." "But that's chaotic," Kora buzzed, her voice slightly distorted by confusion. "Where's the honor?" "The tactical elegance." "Honor doesn't win battles," Tank replied cheerfully. "Results win battles. When humans invented scorched earth tactics, we weren't thinking about honor. We were thinking, if I can't have it, nobody can have it. When we developed the concept of acceptable losses, we weren't being noble. We were being practical." Blitz flickered to a sickly green color. "But you destroyed your own infrastructure. You sacrificed your own people." "Welcome to the beautiful madness of human warfare," Tank said. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. It's not pretty, it's not elegant, and it sure isn't civilized. But it works." Professor Thane's crystalline structure chimed softly, like wind chimes having a revelation. "You're saying that human warfare succeeds because it's unpredictable." "I'm saying human warfare succeeds because we're too crazy to predict," Tank corrected. "You know what the first rule of human combat doctrine is? There are no rules. You know what the second rule is? If someone tries to make rules, break them creatively." She gestured toward the simulation chamber where the wreckage of her victory still smoldered. "Vex here is a tactical genius. He can calculate optimal strategies faster than most supercomputers. But all that genius depends on the assumption that your opponent is going to behave rationally." Vex's scales shifted to an embarrassed purple. "Your tactics weren't rational." "Exactly. I turned maintenance drones into psychological warfare weapons. I used the fire suppression system as area denial. I built a catapult out of plumbing supplies. None of that makes sense if you're thinking rationally." "But it worked," Professor Thane said slowly, as if the words tasted strange. "It worked because you were prepared for sophisticated tactics, elegant strategies, and civilized warfare. You weren't prepared for someone to treat your entire battlefield like a giant improvised weapon." Tank grinned. "Humans don't fight fair, Professor. We fight to win." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft chiming of Professor Thane's contemplation. Finally he spoke. "Captain Morrison, congratulations. You're promoted to Advanced Tactical Instructor, effective immediately." Tank blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "It appears," Thane said, his crystalline form shifting to what might have been amusement, that the Galactic Council has much to learn about the art of primitive warfare. 6 months later, Tank stood in front of a classroom that had been completely reconfigured to accommodate what the Academy now called applied human combat theory. The pristine holographic displays had been replaced with salvaged equipment, improvised weapons, and what appeared to be a full-scale replica of a human military surplus store. The walls were covered with diagrams showing things like optimal duct tape applications and creative uses for household chemicals. Her students were no longer fellow cadets. These were senior military officers from across the galaxy, species with centuries of tactical experience and strategic knowledge that spanned star systems. They sat in the cobbled-together classroom with expressions ranging from skeptical curiosity to barely concealed terror. Commander Vex sat in the front row, his scales permanently shifted to an attentive yellow-green. He now carried a datapad filled with notes about human unpredictability coefficients, and had developed what he called tactical flexibility protocols. Lieutenant Kora occupied 3 seats with her expanding collection of human warfare manuals, her compound eyes constantly scanning for new examples of controlled chaos theory. Sergeant Blitz had somehow managed to install recording equipment in his plasma matrix, documenting every lesson for later analysis. "Welcome to Chaos Theory 101, Tank announced, grinning at her audience of distinguished alien officers, also known as how humans accidentally conquered the galaxy by being too crazy to predict." She clicked a remote, and the wall display showed a star map with human colonies scattered across previously impossible territories. Let's start with a simple question. How does a species that only figured out faster than light travel 30 years ago end up with settlements in regions that veteran spacefaring civilizations avoided for millennia? A crystalline officer that looked like Professor Thane's younger, more anxious cousin raised a geometric appendage. Superior human technology? Nope, Tank said cheerfully. We've got maybe the 3rd best technology in known space, and that's being generous. A gaseous being that resembled a sentient cloud formation spoke next. Advanced strategic planning capabilities? Hey, we're still arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Strategic planning is not our strong suit. The class exchanged confused glances. Finally, a multi-armed creature that looked like it had been designed by a committee asked, "Then how?" Tank's grin widened. Because when every other species looked at a planet with acid rain, carnivorous plants, and gravity that could crush most life forms, they said that's impossible to colonize. Humans said challenge accepted and figured out how to make it work. She advanced to the next slide, showing images of human colonies in environments that violated several laws of common sense. This is Colony Delta 7, built inside an active volcano because the geothermal energy was too good to pass up. This is Station Omega 3, constructed in the middle of a space storm because humans thought the lightning looked pretty. And this is Settlement Alpha 9, established on a planet where the local wildlife is actively trying to eat the colonists, because apparently humans find that character building. The gaseous being rippled with what might have been disbelief. That's not tactical planning, that's madness. That's Tuesday, Tank replied, unconsciously echoing her comment from months earlier. The Galactic Council spent centuries developing colonization protocols based on safety, sustainability, and logical resource management. Humans developed colonization protocols based on, hey, I bet we could make this work and what's the worst that could happen? She clicked to another slide showing casualty reports. Human colonies have a 60% higher failure rate than galactic standard. They also expand at 3 times the normal rate and produce twice as many technological innovations per capita. Vex's scales shifted to a thoughtful bronze. High risk, high reward strategic philosophy. Exactly. Which brings us to today's lesson. Tank gestured toward a collection of improvised weapons displayed along the classroom wall. The Galactic Council has decided to implement human tactical doctrine in their special forces units. Congratulations, everyone. You're about to learn how to fight like humans. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or nervous breakdowns. Today we'll be covering basic improvised weaponry, environmental exploitation, and what humans call making it up as you go along. Next week we'll tackle psychological warfare, acceptable losses, and the fine art of turning your enemy's advantages into disadvantages. Tank picked up what appeared to be a standard energy weapon that had been extensively modified with duct tape, spare parts, and what looked suspiciously like components from a kitchen appliance. Who can tell me what this is? The class stared in horrified fascination. Anyone? It's a standard-issue plasma rifle crossed with a microwave oven, powered by a car battery, and stabilized with the gyroscope from a children's toy. It probably violates 47 safety regulations and definitely voids the manufacturer's warranty. It's also completely unpredictable, which makes it the perfect human weapon. She set the device carefully on the desk, where it hummed ominously. Questions? Every hand, appendage, pseudopod, and geometric projection in the room shot up simultaneously. Tank looked out at her class of distinguished military officers, all desperate to understand the beautiful madness of human warfare, and felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction. You know what? She said, settling back against the desk. I think this is going to be fun.